Yes. All right. I'm recording now. All right. So Julia asks, would this also have been the council that decided the hypostatic union, or was it just regarding Mary's motherhood? In reference to the council at Ephesus, the primary purpose was basically to declare that Mary is the mother of God, and they didn't adopt kind of a positive doctrinal statement in a formal way, but the disciplinary measure of opposing Nestorius was one of the most important findings of the Council of Ephesus. So the Council of Ephesus was preeminently just kind of anti-Nestorian. All right, and Bell asked, did Mary get pregnant with Christ's fleshly nature, or did the Spirit coming upon her make the baby into the body part of Christ's nature? I presume you're asking this from Eutychus's point of view. Eutychus did believe in the virgin birth, so I don't want you to think that Eutychus believed that there was a human conjugal interaction that resulted in her pregnancy. So it was a miraculous pregnancy with a human child, and then the Logos came upon that human child and sort of mixed with it, and the human element became a combined and human element. So what we have is Christ having one nature in Eutychus's formulation. Right. So this brings us to the Council of Chalcedon, and this is really what I wanted to get to. All right. The Council of Chalcedon is going to come up with a positive doctrinal formulation, and you're going to see this in your notes. I've got that expressed in your notes. It's on page 5 of your notes, and I'm going to be turning to that in a minute. But you'll also see the chart on page 5. I want to try to explain what's going on here to help you wrestle with this here. Let's go back to the original question that Cyril and Nestorius were debating. Is Mary the mother of God? Okay. Is it right to call Mary the mother of God? And again, that's less a claim about the dignity of Mary. It's certainly not a claim about the dignity of Mary. It's much more a claim about the nature of Christ. Is it possible for Jesus Christ, who is God, is it possible, is it right to say that he has a human mother? Okay, that's the question. It's a question about the nature of Christ. Okay, not about the nature of Mary, but about the nature of Christ. So I want to bring you then to this next slide here, and you see the charts. What I've listed on the top there are attributes of human nature. What does it mean to be human? It means that it's possible that humans can die. It's possible for humans to sin. I want to note that sinfulness and corruption are not inherent to humanity. Remember that Adam and Eve were created in the garden before the fall. It's not that they were inherently sinners, but they did have the capacity to sin, right? Again, a sinful nature is not part of human nature, because Adam was not created with a sinful nature, but it was a nature that could be susceptible. So can die, can sin, can be born of woman, of course. And of course, it is incumbent upon humanity to humble himself before God. We are God's creatures, right? So those are attributes of humanity. And then down at the bottom, I've got attributes of deity there. So we talk about immortal, from everlasting to everlasting, worthy of worship. These are attributes of the divine nature. You don't worship anything that is not deity, right? That would be idolatry, for example. So that's a peculiar attribute of deity, right? Okay. Now, as we dig into this here, I want you to think about these attributes of inherent humanity and ask yourself, can these attributes apply to the divine nature? In other words, can we say that deity can die? Deity can sin. It's quite appropriate to say humanity can die. A human can die, a human can sin, but to say God can die, that's heretical, right? And so look at there, by the way, I hope you're just impressed with my graphics here. I was prepared to write this up on the board. I'm used to writing this up on the board. And last night, I just had a binge of technological prowess and actually came up with that really nice yellow circle. And then like, oh, look at that, you know, warning, warning, really bad. That's heretical. I just thought, all right. Similarly, if we were to attribute to the human nature, if we were to say that it's part of human nature to be from everlasting to everlasting, or to say that you can worship humanity, we all know that that too is heretical. So there's my little warning thing right there. That's heretical. So we cannot assign attributes of the human nature to the divine nature, nor vice versa. However, what about the person? Okay. What about the person? So Jesus Christ is fully human and he is fully God. Okay, he is fully human and he's fully God. And if Jesus is fully human, then we can attribute attributes of humanity to him. So can Jesus die? Yes. Can Jesus sin? Yes. Jesus, unlike Adam, is faithful and he doesn't sin, but the scriptures tell us he was like us, tempted in every way, you know, so he certainly was tempted and the temptation was real and he was faithful. And can he be born of woman? Why, of course, because Jesus is fully human and Jesus submits to and reverences God, right? But it's also true, since Jesus is fully God, that he is immortal. He is from everlasting to everlasting. Think about John chapter 1. He's certainly worthy of worship, and he warrants the divine name. You can call him God. So attributes of the person of Jesus, all of these attributes apply to the person of Jesus. So look at that. There's no heresy there. To say that Jesus can die, to say that Jesus can sin, to say that Jesus is immortal, okay? Right? There's no heresy there. The heresy comes in when we attribute the attributes of the human nature to the divine nature, but we can attribute all of these points to the person of Jesus Christ, okay? So this means, over against Eutychus, who wanted to combine Jesus into one nature, if you combine Jesus into one nature, Cyril kind of tended this way, and Eutychus went sort of whole hog in this direction. If Jesus is only one nature and we call it some sort of a combined divine and human nature, then we're going to say some silly things like deity can sin and humanity is immortal and things like that. It leads us into all kinds of absurdities, okay? And I hope you see then that Eutychus is heretical for that reason. Now, over against Nestorius, remember Nestorius wanted to, in order to protect against that kind of problem that Eutychus has, Nestorius refused to say that Mary is the mother of God, okay? Mary is the mother of God. He wanted to keep Jesus's natures separate, not just distinct, but separate, so that they couldn't even be reconciled into one person. And so Eutychus would have had problems with the right side of this. I'm sorry, Nestorius would have had problems with the affirmations on the right side because he wanted to keep those natures in Christ so separated that they can't be reconciled into one person. Okay. So this brings us then to the definition of Chalcedon, and one of the great Christological statements in the history of the church is the definition of Chalcedon that resolves all of this. And you can see, just like if you remember the Nicene formula, if you remember that the Nicene formula has Arius, it's like fighting words against Arius. What this is fighting words against Apollinaris and against Nestorius and against Eutychus, Okay, and I went through those three guys, and I hope you can see their view of Jesus Christ challenged and confronted in the formulation of the definition of Chalcedon. Okay, so here we have it. Therefore, following the Holy Fathers, we all with one accord teach men to acknowledge one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at once complete in Godhead and complete in manhood, truly God and truly man, consisting also of a reasonable soul and body. You see it over against Apollinaris there? He's got a reasonable soul and body, of one substance with the Father as regards his Godhead, echoing Nicaea there, and at the same time of one substance with us as regards his manhood. That's what had not been very clear in the Nicene formula, but now it's abundantly clear in Chalcedon. He is at one with us as regards his manhood. And he's like us in all respects apart from sin. He fully shares the human nature. He's got a human spirit and a human body. As regards his Godhead, begotten of the Father before the ages, but yet as regards his manhood, begotten for us men and for our salvation of Mary the Virgin, the God-bearer, Theotokos. There we go. Theotokos is very clearly affirmed here. So yes, Mary is the mother of God. Mary the Virgin, the God-bearer, one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, recognized in two natures. A very important qualification here. He's recognized in two natures without confusion. We don't confuse the natures like Eutychus did, right? Without change, like Apollinaris and Eutychus both. Without division, Nestorius wanted to divide the natures, right? And without separation over against Nestorius again. Okay. The distinction of nature being in no way annulled by the union. So these two natures come together into one person. There's not two persons in Christ, there's one person. All right. But rather, it goes on, the characteristics of each nature being preserved and coming together to form one person and subsistence, not as parted or separated into two persons, against Nestorius here, but one and the same Son and only begotten God the Word, Lord Jesus Christ, even as the prophets from earliest times spoke of him, and our Lord Jesus Christ himself taught us, and the creed of the fathers has handed down to us. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. So, and Chalcedon then, this is a great statement of Christology here. So again, the Nicene Creed is Trinitarian. This is Christological. It's a statement about the doctrine of Christ. It affirms that he is one person and that he's two natures, and those two natures are fully God, fully man. Bell asks, would they have distinguished, divided, and separated if they were both addressing Nestorius? I think that they're just sort of piling on to make sure that there's no ambiguity about the heresy of Nestorius here. So it's following the disciplinary finding of the Council of Ephesus that preceded it. Ephesus is 431, but then Chalcedon comes 20 years later in 451 with a clear doctrinal statement that kind of coalesces all the theological reflection on these issues and brings them to a head. All right. So so this helps us to understand a number of things. If we come back to the question, is Mary the mother of God? Is Mary Theotokos? The answer is emphatically yes. The Orthodox Christian biblical affirmation is yes, Mary is the mother of God. In fact, it's heresy to deny that Mary is the mother of God. The reason being, and if you come back to my chart here, my schematic, that let's look at the attributes of Jesus. An attribute of Jesus is that he can be born of woman, right? And an attribute of Jesus is that he warrants the name Yahweh or the divine title God, right? He's fully God and he's fully man. Therefore, Mary is the mother of God. Now, let's come back here though. Can we say Mary is the mother of deity? No, see, then now that's heresy, right? To say that Mary is the mother of the divine nature, that's heresy. Okay. But Mary is the mother of the one we call God, that's orthodox. If I can go to a passage in the scriptures, the apostles talk this way. And I think one of the clearest passages I could go to is in Acts chapter 20. This is when Paul is gathered the Ephesian elders together, and he's basically exhorting them to be faithful as elders overseeing the church. And in verse 28, he commands them, he says, "Take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to," and listen to this, "shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood." Okay, listen to that phrase, shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. All right. Did God bleed? Well, look at the expression that Paul uses right there in Acts 20:28. Did God bleed? Yes. You have to say it because Paul says it's there in text, Acts 20:28. Did God die on the cross? Yes. Okay, now, did deity die on the cross? No. Did the divine nature die on the cross? No. Hopefully you see the difference between what we can affirm and what we cannot affirm, right? The divine nature died on the cross. So did Mary bear the one we call God? Yes. Did Mary bear deity itself? No. Okay. Jed asks, how is that different from Christotokos? It's different because it's not contradictory. Christotokos just emphasizes different thing, where Christ means that she is the bearer of Christ. She's the bearer of the Messiah. Okay, that's what Christotokos means. Theotokos means she's the bearer of God, and that's what the contention was about. The awkward moment when praise is here. Hopefully this is all clear to you. Yes, Christ is the one we call God. In fact, I'll read for you something that I find really helpful. And this is speaking like a good, true Presbyterian here. The Westminster Confession of Faith says this, and it's very helpful, I think. This is in its state chapter on Christology in chapter 8, section 7 of the Westminster Confession. But listen to the formulation here. I think it's very helpful. Christ in the work of mediation acteth according to both natures, by each nature doing what is proper to itself. So in the work of mediation, he acts according to both natures. But this is the important qualification, each nature according to what is proper to itself. Yet by reason of the unity of the person, that which is proper to one nature is sometimes in Scripture attributed to the person denominated the other. That's a mouthful, but that which is proper to one nature is sometimes in Scripture attributed to the person denominated by the other. So I gave you an instance from the Scriptures, Acts 20:28. Shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. And again, the he there grammatically is God. Okay, God bled. But we understand that to mean that the person bled. The person, Jesus Christ, who we rightly call God, bled. But we do not say deity bled, because that would be heretical. Deity did not die on the cross, but the person who is God died on the cross. Okay, so hopefully that helps you to understand some of the most important contours of Christology here. So again, to bring this back into the widest nutshell, pulling away here, the Arian controversy addressed when it was resolved, we have a clear Trinitarian formulation. We have the deity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? And the key contentious issue was over the deity of the Son. Did Jesus partake of the same divine essence as the Father does? And the answer at the Council of Nicaea and of First Constantinople following it was an emphatic yes, okay? Having settled our Trinitarian formulation, now we have questions about, okay, Jesus, now that we know that he's God, how does that work with his humanity? How does that work with the fact that he died? How did that work with the fact that he was born? And Apollinaris and Nestorius and Eutychus all came up with different ways of addressing that question that were heretical. They all affirmed the deity of Christ, okay? Apollinaris said, though, that Christ was God only with respect to his spirit, but not with respect to his body, with his flesh, okay? Nestorius said Jesus is fully man and fully God, but he's not one person, okay? He's kind of schizophrenic. He's got this God side to him and his man side to him, and he's sort of a dual person entity, and he couldn't reconcile that into a unity of his person. That was Nestorius's problem. Eutychus said, yes, he's one person and he's fully God and he's fully man, but those natures are combined and mixed together, okay? That was Eutychus's error. And again, all three of those errors are addressed in the Chalcedonian formula. They were addressed preeminently in the Council of Chalcedon, Fourth Ecumenical Council, 451. All right, and with that, I hope I've caught all the questions that have occurred in the chat box, but any other questions for you, from you? All right. Well, if something should occur, don't hesitate to toss it. Let's see. Okay, Abby says, just to make sure I have the wording correct, we would say that anything that happens to Christ's human nature is applied to the whole person because his natures are not divided. That is correct. But we don't apply anything that happens to his human nature to the divine nature. So we apply it to the person, yes, but to the other nature, no. So like dying is proper to human nature, okay? Or being born of a woman is proper to human nature, but it's not proper to divine nature. And if it's proper to human nature, then we say Christ is born of a woman, that Christ died. And we can say God died. Okay. So Annalisa asks, what exactly about Eutychus makes it untrue? The problem with Eutychus, he combines the natures and mixes them, and therefore we can't assign what's proper to each nature individually. So we wind up with the problem of Mary giving birth to deity, for example, or dying on the cross. If you don't sharply distinguish the natures, we need to distinguish the natures, but we don't separate them as though Jesus is two persons, but we have to distinguish them. And that's what Eutychus failed to do. Okay. All right, very good. So Eston's clarifying here, he says, so he makes them one and the same. That's exactly what Eutychus does. Eutychus was really trying to avoid Nestorius's error. And Nestorius did fall into error because he couldn't bring the two natures together into one person. But in his effort to avoid Eutychus's error, in Eutychus's effort to avoid Nestorius's error, pardon my sloppy speech there, Eutychus's effort to avoid Nestorius's error, he fell into the ditch on the opposite side of the road. In affirming one person, he wouldn't affirm two natures. Okay. Nestorius affirmed two natures, but not one person, and Eutychus affirmed one person and therefore not two natures, right? And the Orthodox formulation is to assert two natures in one person, and Chalcedon expresses that. Okay. All right, hopefully that's clear. So I need to shift gears into another thread here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everyone like a 2.5 minute break or so. And then, as I said, we've got the other thread to go down, the other wheel rut to move into, US history stuff. So let's take a break of a couple minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then we're going to be back here. So everyone can stretch, pour another cup of coffee, and join you back here.
Visitors, I just have a quick note from Dr. Schlect. He is going to be available after class to answer your questions about this class, about how he teaches, and really anything NSA related. So just wanted to give you a quick note on that. And sorry, while I've got the mic on here, if you do have immediate questions, feel free to shoot me a text.
Oh, all right. So somebody, we've got a visitor in Spokane who knows some of my family members, which is a good thing. Maybe they might do some that sort of redeem the reputation of the name up there in Spokane. All right, I want to regroup here. Hopefully, can you all see this, the slide that says family values? All right, very good. So now I'm picking up where I left off from last time here. And for the visitors, as I warned you, and the students are aware of this, we're actually diving into 20th century United States history. There are a number of reasons why we're doing that. It's supporting some of the research projects that the students have in front of them. And they're basically, there are a number of reasons why we do this, but we keep kind of old world history and new world history running here. And so where we were last time is basically some introductory reflections where I began with basically a study of the gendered confusion that we have today, and the question of how Christians are supposed to think about this. And I do want to use history as one of the tools. Of course, we turn to Scripture for these things, but history is one of the tools that's going to give us traction for getting into this. And I began with also a caution about how history is sometimes used. If we don't like some of the things that we see in our culture today, then one of the ways that we will get leverage over against the things that we don't like is to beat it with the past, to elevate the past and say, my, how we've fallen. Boy, things used to be so much better. We have declined today. Look, we're going to hell in a handbasket. The world is falling apart. The moral bearings are falling by the wayside. The Romans were notorious for this. If you read Sallust and Juvenal and some of those Romans, Tacitus also has tinges of this, Suetonius, this is a tool that people often use with history. And what I want to guard you against is using that tool at least improperly. Sometimes it is indeed true that, you know, there is moral decline. Moral decline happens, but don't let your present day desire to criticize what you see around you to unfairly cover and glamorize the past. What I'm suggesting is we should not be blind to the shortcomings of the past. But that's one of the temptations that we have. And one of my concerns is if we say, oh, let's just rewind the clock to the 1950s where we had baseball and mom and apple pie and men were men and women were women and things will be better. Are we sure that things would be better? Is that an accurate and appropriate look at the 1950s? And we tend not to ask those hard questions if we're so caught up in beating the present today that we will just, surely the past must be pure white as the driven snow, because look at how bad we are today, right? That's the historical temptation. Erica is exactly right. Racially, we've made some great strides since the 1950s, but milkshakes are a lot easier to come by. Very, very good. Annalisa, you guys get the idea. So one of my concerns now, to bring that into focus, that's the methodological observation we talked about last time, but in the face of some of the gender and sexual confusion that we have in our day, to go back to the 1950s and 40s to the traditional family and traditional family values, okay? And I want to survey the middle of the 20th century in order to raise some serious questions about the family values that prevailed in that age is worth recovering, okay? And we tend to just say, oh, we need to go back to grandma's time because look at what a mess we are today. Let's ask ourselves, maybe, possibly, could it be that the mess that we're experiencing today is derivative from where grandma had been? And maybe we don't want to recover those values. So that's the question that I'm leading in with, and I want to move into some details here. All right, so I want to focus on the 20th century family, and in order to set that up, I want to put the 20th century family in the context of modernity, So there's my nice slide to indicate modernity. One of the things that the early modern world taught us, the Enlightenment taught us, is that nature is an impersonal machine by predictable billiard ball type physics that can be observed, categorized, and studied, and assigned to rules. We can come up with things like laws of gravity, laws of motion, for example, and these are physical laws. And then in the 19th century, this would be the 1800s, Thomas Huxley and Charles Darwin and others, you're familiar with Darwin, began to collapse the distinction between human beings and the rest of creation. So the Enlightenment tells us that nature is sort of ordered by laws, it can be studied and that sort of thing. Now, in the 19th century, we start seeing human beings as rather than separate and distinct from nature, as part of that behaves in a law-like kind of mechanical scientific way. This kind of thinking gave rise to, of course, evolutionary science, and you're familiar with that, but also to a collection of other disciplines that we call social sciences. These are sciences that reduce the study of human beings to statistical aggregates. So these are 19th century intellectual developments that also happen to intersect with the socio and economic and political phenomenon that we call the Industrial Revolution. All right, Cole asks a good question about periodization. When I say modernity, do you mean present day, or are you talking about the modern era, like 1500s to 1800s? I would distinguish, first of all, when I'm talking about today, I prefer the word contemporary. This is the historian in me speaking here. We do not today live in a modern age, we live in a postmodern age, okay? Modernity traces back what I call early modernity in the 1500s up until about 1800. And then we have there's early modernity and then industrial modernity. And 1800 would be about the pivot there. So when you think about Renaissance, Enlightenment, Reformation, all of those things are part of the early modern world, but they're pre-industrial. And then the Industrial Revolution changes a bunch of life ways, and that's, I would put that around 1800. And then when we get to roughly around about 2000-ish, with the breakdown of the modern nation state, geopolitically, with the advent of the internet, we're starting to move into postmodernity now. So that's a quick periodization and terminology. Good. And Abby said, fancy word, the study of human beings is reduced to, I probably said statistical aggregates, like we aggregate people into, so you can say, 58% of Hispanics voted this way. That's aggregating people, grouping them so you can assign numbers to them and describe them numerically with their behaviors. Okay. All right. Very good. So all of that to say then this, the 19th century, not only was nature orderly, but nature existed to be harnessed. And humans as part of nature now, humans can be part of that nature that can be subjected to like harnessing, okay? So men are machines. Then if men are part of nature and nature is machine-like, then men can be machines. They're among nature's resources that can be put to practical use. To be sure, men are sophisticated machines. They're not ordinary machines. But the value of man, and we start to see this kind of thinking when, in industrial modernity in the 19th century, the value of man is measured pretty much by the same criteria that we measure the value of a machine. Modern man possesses dignity, not because he is the image bearer of God, but only to the extent that he brings usefulness or productive value, the way we measure a machine. The modern world witnessed the craftsman being replaced by the manufacturer, okay? A craftsman, think about the difference between someone who performs a craft on the one hand versus manufacturing on the other. A craftsman sees a whole project through from start to finish, but a manufacturer divides complicated projects into little discrete component parts, discrete little tasks. And each separate task is a simple little task, and it's far easier to handle as a simple little task than the whole project. And it requires far less skill to perform a specialized little task than it does to carry out an entire project from start to finish. And I think we all know then the difference between somebody who who works on the GM assembly line versus somebody who goes into his garage and builds a car from scratch. Okay, the one who goes into a garage and builds a car from scratch is a craftsman, and he performs something that amazes us. But someone who just like turns a wrench on an assembly line and attaches the left rear quarter panel and gets really good at it is not a craftsman. He's an industrial cog in the economic machinery, right? All right. So it takes a craftsman years to master his trade, years of experience that fetches a good wage, right? But any oaf can perform a specialized task on an assembly line, and oafs are dirt cheap and they're replaceable. Like, it doesn't take training to turn a wrench. And so we in the modern West got used to approaching all of human activity the way Henry Ford would approach the manufacture of a Model A. So we divide the whole complex project of human activity in its discrete little component parts. And with each little component, we isolate its problems, we assign objectives, and most importantly, rules that apply to that little component part. Basically, we conquer our human callings by dividing them, right? We separate my calling as different from your calling, and so we start to see even human activity as specialized and cordoned off into specialized little discrete tasks. Contrast the modern life way, especially the modern industrial life way, with the pre-modern era. Pre-modern, pre-industrial home was a place where a lot of things happened. Now I want to talk about the home here. Home was where work happened. It was where education happened. It was where medical care and healing was extended. It was where work happened. It was where worship happened and devotional exercises. It was where job training happened. And then again, about 150, 200 years ago, a generation of men started leaving the home, going off to work. Home life and work life emerged as separate spheres, and this is key. And this accelerated in the 20th century when a number of factors gave rise to the suburbs. And so let's bring this backdrop into the 20th century, which is what I'm talking about here. And I want to talk to you now about the middle of the 20th century, the migration of Americans from cities and farms, from really densely populated cities on the one hand, or rural farming type areas on the other, the migration of them from both places into suburbs, which are places outside the city, is one of the most important demographic shifts of the 20th century. Look at the Escalante has talked about this. Very, very good. So this led to the modern suburban home. And we start to see this emerging in the middle of the 20th century, particularly in the 1950s, although the run up to it certainly predated the war. That this was seen as normal and healthy. And of course, we see television programming and advertisers are promoting the traditional home and family life. We call it traditional, but it's really a recent development, and it's important to understand that. In this industrial vision, home is a specialized place. Home is distinct from where you shop and from where you transact commerce and mercantile activity. Home is distinct from where you work. It's distinct from productive activity. It's distinct from where you learn. It's distinct from educational activity. Home is a specialized place, very narrowly conceived, okay? The idea of being home in a pre-industrial environment is radically different than the idea of being home according to the values and mores of a suburban environment, okay? And one of the worst consequences of this was the advent of the modern suburban housewife. One of the greatest casualties of this development. Consider the expression, a woman's place is the home. Okay, a woman's place is the home. Of course, we need to define our terms and understand our terms in context. If you suggest that, or if you use the expression a woman's place is the home in a pre-modern context, then home means, oh, it's a place of education, of healthcare, of economic development, of creativity, that sort of thing, right? But in the context of modern suburban values, home is a specialized place, okay? Home is distinct from a place of education. We have schools for that. Home is distinct from a place of healthcare. We have hospitals for that. And we have specialized workers who work in the hospitals, who are professionals. And we have professional educators who do the educating, right? And the workplace, the place of economic productivity, is distinct from the home. And so when you say that a woman's place is the home, you're saying that a woman's calling is a calling that's not a calling to education. It's not a calling to healthcare. It's not a calling to economic productivity. It's not a calling to these other things. It's a special, the home has become a specialized industrial domain, okay? And it is upon this foundation that I would suggest to you that most people today in the United States, when they talk about traditional family values, are referring back to the suburban family, which I think needs to be understood not as this timeless thing across time and natural, but as a modern industrial production, and it's got a history to it, okay, at a particular moment in time. And we need to scrutinize the degree to which what we think of as the traditional family, that's our name for it, but I'm talking about the world of your grandparents and great-grandparents here. They were living in a new world, and it's important to recognize that, okay? They were living in a new and unique world, and this world became promoted by advertisers in all kinds of advertisements, whether you're going to buy your gadgets and widgets, the pathway to the good life. When it casts a vision for the good life, this is the good life. And you see it in TV programming and advertising and that sort of thing. All right. So what I want to do now is move through and talk about the Great Depression and World War II. And let's put the traditional family, I'm using that quote, the traditional family, to a test and see how the traditional family actually fares in the time of the Great Depression. Okay, so I want to move down into granular detail here. I'm going to read for you the product of some interviews during the time of the Great Depression of people. Basically, some sociologists went in and interviewed people who were experiencing the Great Depression. And I want you to listen to this. I'm reading from an actual interview from the 1930s about a woman describing family life during the Great Depression. And she says this: "My husband was a sheet metal worker. He'd been working steady, but when the hard times came, he was just off and on, off and on." This is the wife speaking now. "I got a job helping out in a grocery store across from a school. I made sandwiches for the kids during their lunch hour, made a little money on the way, and got some good sandwiches for my own kids. Otherwise, my kids made bean sandwiches, just mashed up beans and put them between bread. I don't think we ate salad in those days. We had radishes or green onions right out of the garden, but we never seemed to have a salad. We ate lots of macaroni and spaghetti, and I could make 3 pounds of hamburger go a long way. I used to mix a pound of butter with a pound of margarine, and if I didn't tell them, people didn't know the difference, and I didn't tell them. I figured every which way I could to make ends meet, turned shirt collars, watched for specials, but some of them ends just wouldn't meet. They couldn't be stretched far enough to meet. I did what I had to do. I seemed to always find a way to think." Okay, so that's a housewife's report about the hard times of the Great Depression. Her husband was out of work. I want you to recognize that she's deploying all kinds of tactics, and she's got some tools at her disposal to try to make home life much more efficient. Okay, I'd like you to notice her creativity in her industry and how significant that was in helping the family through the Great Depression. But notice, and I'm going to read further on now, notice the contrast to her husband. Okay. The husband couldn't find work. And now I'm picking up in the interview where I left off. This is the wife speaking, I did what I had to do. I seemed to always find a way to make things work. I think hard times is harder on a man because a woman, you see, will do something. Women just seem to know where they can save or where they can help more than a man. It's just a worry for him, and he feels it terrible when he can't take care of the family. My husband got very despondent, you know. Oh, he'd say, you can't have this, or you're not getting that, and I don't want to hear about this. He was just fighting against all the time. A woman, like I said, can take more than a man. All right. So lurking behind the hardship is the notion that a woman's place is the home and the man's calling is away from home. But in the context of widespread unemployment, men who were deprived of a job couldn't do anything about it. If your specialty is being away from the home, I'm talking about the man here, and away from the home there's no jobs, then you've got no productive activity that you can be doing. The woman's sphere remained intact. When you've got unemployment, there's still a home, right? And her sphere remained intact, and she could do things that had a positive impact. But the man was left to do nothing because the home isn't his calling. The overtight and inflexible notion of what a man's role is meant that he could only be a burden and never a help. Okay? Now, I want to read on. Here's an account of the Patterson family. And this was a social worker who interviewed the Pattersons. And this is in the third person. She visited the Pattersons. She's studying unemployment and its effects. So this is again from the 1930s. A social worker writes this. Prior to the Depression, Mr. Patterson was an inventory clerk earning from $35 to $40 a week. He lost his job in 1931. At the present time, he does not earn anything, while his 8-year-old girl gets $12.50 a week working at Woolworths, and his wife has part-time work cleaning a doctor's office. Unemployment and depression have hit Mr. Patterson much more than the rest of the family. The hardest thing about unemployment, Mr. Patterson says, is the humiliation within the family. It makes him feel very useless to have his wife and daughter bring in a little money to the family while he doesn't contribute a nickel. It's awful for him because now, in his words, the tables are turned. He has to ask his daughter for a little money for tobacco or whatever he might want, and he would rather walk miles away than ask for carefree money like that. His daughter would want him to have a little money for his tobacco, and he can't bring himself to ask for it. He feels more irritable and more morose than he ever did in life. He doesn't enjoy eating. Mr. Patterson hasn't slept well in months. He lies awake and tosses, wondering what he will do and what will happen to them if he doesn't ever get work anymore. He feels that there's nothing to wake up for in the morning and nothing to live for. He wonders what would happen if he put himself out of the picture or just got out of the way of his wife. Perhaps she and the girl would get along better without him. Mr. Patterson blames himself for being unemployed, and while he tries all day long to find work and would take any job, he feels that he would be successful if he had taken advantage of his opportunities in his youth when he had the opportunity to secure an education. Mr. Patterson believes that his wife and daughter have adjusted themselves to the depression better than he has. In fact, sometimes they seem so tearful that he can't stand it anymore. He grabs his hat and says he is going out for a while, and he walks hard for an hour before he comes home again. This is one thing he never did before unemployment, but he is so nervous and jumpy now, he has to do something like that to prevent himself from exploding. Okay, so I'll leave off from the passage there that I was reading from the 1930s. Now, I want you to pay attention to the social worker who turns, the social worker describes Mrs. Patterson's experience of the depression differently than Mr. Patterson. And we start to see tensions that beset the family. Here's what the social worker says describing Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson says that they have not felt the depression so terribly themselves or changed their way of living so very much. You see, the wife has such a radically different outlook on this than the husband does. The wife thinks it is her husband's fault that he is unemployed. He has become irritable and very hard to get along with. He talks of nothing else and isn't interested in anything else but troubles. She and her daughter try to forget troubles and have a good time once in a while, but he just sits and broods. Of course, that makes her impatient with him. She cannot sit at home and keep him company, so that during the past couple of years, she and her daughter just go out together without him. It isn't that they leave him out. He just isn't interested and stays at home. You'll notice, so the man who's called to have a job and feels, and it's baked into his bones, that my job is to provide and to have a job, when in the face of unemployment, he's got nothing. He's got nothing. Now, I want to turn back to Mr. Patterson. I want you to listen carefully to what happened to this marriage, the Patterson marriage, during the Depression. Of course, scarcity is a huge concern. But an observation we should make is this: scarcity shouldn't wreck a family, right? Scarcity should not wreck a family. It can present all kinds of problems, but a family should be intact and bear up together. We take wedding vows to love one another in plenty and in want. I would argue that the family problems that arose in the Great Depression, and these problems were the Pattersons, I've selected them because they represent a widespread trend. The family problems were brought about not by economic hardship. A family should be able to stick together in an economic hardship, but they were brought about by a false expectation that flowed from an unhealthy modernist conception of an absolute separation of men's roles and women's roles. Does that make sense? It's industrial modernity and the fragmentation and specialization of callings that produce the family chaos that we see in the Pattersons, because the husband's work is specialized and the wife's work is specialized. And so when his specialization is removed because of unemployment, he's got nothing, and she still has tools that she can leverage, right? All right, so let's turn to Mr. Patterson here. Mr. Patterson insists that his child is as sweet as ever and tries to cheer him up, but the tenor of his conversation about his wife is different. His wife does go out more with the daughter, leaving him alone. Mr. Patterson cannot stand it, worrying so as he does at having them, his wife and daughter, lighthearted. Mr. Patterson says this: when you are not bringing in any money, you don't get so much attention. She doesn't nag all the time the way some women do, but Mr. Patterson knows that she blames him for being unemployed. He intimates that they also have fewer intimate relations as a married couple. It is nothing that I do or don't do, no change in me, Mr. Patterson says, but when I tell her that I want more love, she just gets mad. It comes about gradually, he said. He cannot point definitely to any time when he noticed the difference in her, but he knows that his advances are rebuffed now when they would not have been rebuffed before the hard times. It doesn't get much more intimate than the marriage bed here, right? What we see, how do you get from the conjugal intimacy of a husband and wife, how is it that unemployment can affect that? Okay, and that's a pretty dramatic effect that I would suggest to you. And it's because the husband just feels like a loser. Why does he feel like a loser? Because his specialization is employment and he's facing unemployment, right? Of course, the Bible teaches that husbands and wives are different. and that men and women are different. It's not enough to merely insist that they're different, important as that may be. We need to search the scriptures, I suggest, to imagine how we should reckon the difference. So what we have in the 20th century modernity is men were men and women are women. And of course, we see confusion about that today, right? But what I want to suggest to you that the 20th century notion of men were men and women were women also has some problems with it, okay? Masculinity and femininity are really objectively distinct, but we recognize the distinction not by examining masculinity all by itself on the one hand, and on the other by considering femininity all on its own by itself. The Bible teaches us to discern masculinity and femininity by seeing how they work together and how they play off of one another. Each one sets a context for the other. Masculinity helps us to understand what femininity is, and femininity helps us to understand what masculinity is. You don't kind of analyze masculinity decontextualized, or nor femininity. But industrial modernity trained us to try to do that. Nobody, think about this, no one would ever ask whether a particular musical note, I'm going to go out on a limb here and use an analogy from music here. No one would say that a B flat always has to be the melody in a song, the B flat note. We all know that a B flat note might betray a melody. We also know that at a later point, maybe even in the same song, a B flat might not be the melody, maybe it's the harmony. And when I say this, am I introducing confusion into the distinction between melody and harmony? No. How do you distinguish melody from harmony? You distinguish them by watching them interact around one another and within the life of a song. You don't tell them apart according to their absolute position on a musical scale, right? And so it is, I argue, with masculinity and femininity. In a healthy community, you should always tell the difference between boys and girls, between men and women. But the way you tell them apart is by watching the music of their interaction and the cultural gestures that surround them. You don't do it in the modern way by limiting boys to some tasks and specializations and girls to other tasks, boys to some spheres and girls to other spheres. So of course, the Bible teaches us that husband and wives are different and that men and women are different. But it's not enough simply to insist that they are different, as important as it is to insist that. We need to search the scriptures to examine how to reckon the difference. Masculinity and femininity are really and objectively distinct. Okay, so my thesis at this point is this, that we understand the two by studying them in conjunction with one another. Masculinity is understood by looking at it together with femininity, and femininity is understood by looking at it together with masculinity. Masculinity is like one voice in a fugue that has two voices in it, or something like that. They shift notes, but that's not always a bad thing. All right. So I want to move forward. I love this picture here. Why can't you give my dad a job? Very sad. But let's move to World War II. I've talked about the Great Depression. I want you to keep some of these ideas in mind now as I move into World War II. And World War II was a time of hardship as well, just like the Great Depression was a time of hardship. Very different type of hardship, but hardship nonetheless. It's a time period when the distinction between masculinity and femininity was, for the most part, upheld. And the distinction, despite the fact that women start taking up jobs that were traditionally associated with men. And this is going to be really interesting to watch. But here we see an image of Rosie the Riveter, very famous image here. Does she look to you like a guy? I think the answer is pretty obvious. No. By the way, Olivia is asking about the source for the Pattersons. I'll have to get back to you on that. But email here. I didn't have it. Actually, it's from a book on my shelf, but I don't want to pull it down from my shelf just now. Anyway, back to Rosie the Riveter here. So she's obviously, we can do it. We women can actually, construct munitions and that sort of thing for the war effort. But look at her lips. Her lips are accentuated. She's made up. Her hair, while it's not made up for a night on the town, she's got this do-rag thing. And girls, there's probably a better word for it. But that's a feminine way of attiring her hair, not the way a guy would. Bandana, scarf, kerchief, I don't know. All right. So what we have here, these are two women on the factory floor. This is from the Pacific Northwest. On the left, you see a women installing a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine into a fireplane, and on the right, you have a woman working with a drill or a riveter, I can't quite tell, in a fuselage of an aircraft. So these are both photographs from the Boeing plant in Seattle during World War II. And my question to you is, do they look to you like guys? Especially the one on the left. I think that the point is rather obvious. This is taken from a magazine, Women Make Army and Navy Equipment. What we have is a montage of photographs from Life magazine of women working in various industrial capacities, part of wartime production. Now, what is often asserted about this is the claim that is represented here. The wartime presence of women in the workplace left a legacy of confusion about masculinity and femininity. All right, so that's the claim. Some of you have probably heard that here, where we have, if you get women and you stick them in a factory floor, then we're going to start seeing all this gender bending interaction, and we're going to have a confusion about masculinity and femininity. All right. Lurking back behind this claim, an assumption behind this claim is that we discern the difference between masculinity and femininity by which specialization is which. There are certain specializations that are the guy specializations, and if we have women occupying the guy specialized space, then clearly we're confusing masculinity and femininity, right? That assumption is lurking back behind this claim. And I want to try to test this claim against actual historical evidence, okay? So if it's true that putting a woman into a man's sphere, according to the modern demarcation of how we think about specialization, if it's true that that confuses the genders, then we should see that exhibited during World War II when we have a lot of inverted interactions of specialized spaces. Okay, and I want to give you one story here. Prior to World War II, these are cheerleaders, and they're pretty typical cheerleaders, all right? You'd see them on the sideline in an athletic context. Cheerleading was a masculine activity, a very uniquely and distinctively masculine activity. It's at a sporting event, they're yelling, they're leading a crowd, and if you said the word cheerleader in the year 1935, everyone would imagine a male image, okay? Here we have this Yale cheerleaders. Here's the Yale cheer squad from the 1920s. But during wartime, we start to see changes now when men are otherwise engaged, when they're fighting out in the Pacific or they're fighting in the European theater. Sports do continue, although in an interesting way. And one of the changes is that the guys that are left, they're playing the sports, and we didn't have guys to be cheerleaders anymore. So women began occupying the space of the cheerleader during World War II. So here's my question to you. Here we have women occupying a men's space. So do you think that they're guys? Do they look like guys? You know, what you see is an assertion of their femininity, even as they're occupying a role that's conventionally occupied or assigned to men. They're actually, because they're doing something that boys typically do, they actually strain to make sure they're not confused with guys. Does that make sense? You know, so a woman in a kitchen might wear a house coat that could be frumpy because she's doing, because the space and the context itself codes her and assures her that she's feminine, and everyone's going to assert that and understood that that's feminine. But what do you do when you put a woman into a sphere or a space that is conventionally assigned to men? Women will actually go to extra lengths to make sure there's no confusion about whether or not they're women, right? And so we start to see with the cheerleader, it's convention for the cheerleader is to really double down and make sure there is no mistake. So we can go across the state line here to Washington State University. Let me put this question to you. Are they men or women? Look at how they are attired. The tradition for the cheerleader is to double down their female attributes to make sure there is no confusion over what sex they are. So there we have it, enough of the wazoo cheerleaders. One of the things that emerged in the time of World War II is baseball, especially at the minor league level. Major leagues continued, but what happened was there were so many men off fighting war, you know, that pretty much most people who were playing professional ball did it at the major league level, and the minor leagues really got gutted. Some major league players actually went overseas, but their job was taken by minor leaguers who kind of went up the ranks. So there were minor league seasons that were canceled all around the country. And so in the Midwest, we see the development of a professional baseball league for women, the All-America Girls Professional Baseball League. Some of you might be familiar with that 1990s movie, League of Their Own, starring Madonna and Rosie O'Donnell and some others. And it's got Tom Hanks in it. It's kind of a fun movie. And it's a fictitious movie that's based on this baseball league, this women's professional baseball league. But what's interesting here is that we have women playing baseball. This is not softball, mind you, it's baseball. Do they look like guys? No, it's because they're women playing professional baseball, the uniforms, even though it's brutal to slide into second base in a dress, you know, this is athletic gear, and they wanted to be, you know, make sure that these are definitely not men, they are women. They wore makeup, they actually had their hair done by hairdressers. Because they were employees of the baseball league, they actually were sent to charm school and to learn how to make up their faces and their hair. Some of them were inclined to do that, others less so, were rather tomboyish in their behavior. But nonetheless, my point is that most people associate playing baseball with guy stuff. In World War II, when you put girls in that role, they doubled down on their femininity. And so here we have images from the All-America Girls Professional Baseball Team. Several years ago, I actually had a history student do their research project on this All-America Girls Professional Baseball League and interviewed a woman who had actually played in the league. That was several years ago. Probably be hard-pressed to find one who's still alive. She was in her 90s at the time, but it was a great interview and a fun paper. But this is Life magazine here. This is coming into the mainstream. That's not some obscure thing. It was regionally big in the Midwest, but here we see a feminine Midwest league in its third professional season in Life magazine. Okay, so I hope my images of cheerleaders and baseball help to establish the principle that I want you to look for elsewhere. Usually what's studied in World War II in terms of gender roles are the presence of women on the factory floors. That's usually what occupies people's attention. What I'm doing is I'm hoping to widen your gaze a little bit. Like, okay, we also have other arenas where women are occupying men's roles, and we see it in cheerleading, we see it in baseball. And what happens? Well, there's no confusion of the genders when that happens. And that's my conclusion here, right? No confusion of the genders occurred during this time. And so let's go back to the factory floor with this in mind. Here's a recruiting poster. Do the job he left behind. So is the message of this poster, women, take a factory job and lay down your femininity in doing so? Part of the recruiting effort is to try to demonstrate to women that by taking a factory job, you are not sacrificing or compromising your femininity in the least. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have had women who would have been attracted to those jobs. And you see in the promotional imagery that this is consistent with femininity for you to wield a riveter. All right. The more women at work, the sooner we win. Look at her outfit. She is made up. She's got lipstick. Her nails are polished. And down at the lower part of the ad, women needed all farm workers type of salespeople, waitresses, a bunch of things that were where women were needed for the war effort. And of course, women are also going to continue to be shopping, and so they're going to not buy any more than they need to because of the ration stamps. And so women are going to be buying and rationing. We can also move away from the factory floor out into agricultural farm work. Plant a victory garden. And now we have the Women's Land Army. I think one or two of you are actually doing a study on the Women's Land Army, trying to get women not only onto the factory floor, but also out into the farm fields. During World War II, not only was the United States the biggest Allied supplier of munitions, but the United States was also the biggest Allied supplier of food, and working out in farm fields was really important work in World War II for the wartime. And a lot of those jobs out in the farm were conventionally associated with masculine work. But here, the recruiting posters are reassuring women that you're still a woman if you are going to participate in agricultural work. So we've got the Women's Land Army here. Again, look at these women. No one's going to be confused about whether or not they look like guys. Now, when you're recruiting a man, is there any confusion here? No one's going to be confused that this is indeed a guy either. Men make the Navy. All right. Now, we also needed women not only on the factory floor, not only in agricultural work, but we actually needed women in the military. We needed women in the military a lot, especially in the nursing corps, in the quartermaster services, a lot of clerical jobs, keeping military records and office work. We seriously needed women in the military during World War II. And so I want you to consider this right here. Does she, again, the same question, does she look like a guy? Does the presence of women in the military confuse the difference between what makes a man and what makes a woman? In fact, the United States government got fashion designers to specially tailor women's attire, women's uniforms, so that they would be suited, appropriately suited. Obviously, women's body shape is very different than a man's. But not only body shape, to make it look like, okay, this is a uniform, but it's not the kind of uniform we give to guys. It's accentuating the fact that she is a woman, her femininity. Cadet nurse, the girl with a future, a lifetime education for free. Join, again, join join the nursing corps organized by the United States military and be like a guy. Again, I ask you, is that the message? What I would suggest is that these recruiting posters are actually on the femininity of these women. U.S. Marine Corps, women in the Marines. Yes, and we see the specially tailored outfit because we needed women in the military during World War II. Be a Marine and free a Marine fight. This is taken from the archives at Washington State University. I love this. Again, on a college campus, you're going to see tons of recruiting activity during World War II for both men and women. And so this was a flyer that the college women received in the 1940s during wartime. And I love this. So it's a trifold flyer, if you can picture it. So I've unfolded it, and this is one side of it. I'm interested in the U.S. Marine Corps Women's Reserve. And you're going to wear this, look at those cute gloves and the scarf and the hat. I want to be a Marine. And then as you open up that flyer, here's what it looks like. Here's on the left, it's how you'll look. When the sun is warm, you'll wear this moss green and white striped seersucker. When the wind blows, you wear these other clothes, just to assure you of the clothes that you'll wear to induce women that it's okay to become a Marine. So once again, and I hope through repeated images again and again and again, if we come back to our question, whether there's confusion between masculinity and femininity, I think the answer is pretty clear. Let's turn our attention now even to advertising during the time. Attention, lady. We're going to see that cosmetics manufacturers are now actually advertising that these are the cosmetics that'll match your uniform, ladies. So here we go. This is Q-Tex nail polish. And this is telling you that, and it's got all the branches of the U.S. service there, and the women's auxiliaries of them, but it's assuring you you can knock out this dress in the evening gown, but in the daytime you're wearing your uniform, and Q-Tex is there for you. Your nail polish is there to preserve your ladylikeness throughout the whole thing. Elizabeth Arden, the Elizabeth Arden Company came up with a new hue of lipstick called Montezuma Red that was expressly designed to match the epaulets and the scarf that were military issue in military uniforms. Here's lipstick to go with your uniform, ladies. All right. Here's an advertisement. I love this advertisement. So this is an underwear ad, obviously for ladies' undergarments, but look at the heading here. And the image may not be sharp enough for you to read the text, but it's really fascinating. It says, doing man's work, retaining woman's loveliness. So yeah, you may be on the factory floor, but you can retain a woman's loveliness, and you do this with your form-fit undergarment. It says, a wartime secret shared by thousands. The text reads, you too, like thousands of other women who do men's work without sacrificing one bit of feminine loveliness. The secret is to ensure a lovely line to be fitted to a tailored to precision, I can't make out the word, but garter or bra, and they're tailored to fit. It's the Form Fit company. Basically, you can even go onto the factory, and if you wear these undergarments, ladies, you still look like a lady. All right, I'll get to that image that next image in a moment. But if we were to return to my original question, the historical claim is often made that women occupying men's roles on the factory floor in World War II were the foundation for the gendered confusion that we see today. The answer to that question, I suspect, I would propose to you, is pretty clear. No. No. The reason why we might suspect that that could be the answer to the question is that we smuggle in this modernist notion of how we register the difference between men and women. How do we register the difference between men and women? According to their specializations, right? Only if you entertain that assumption that specialization, job specialization in the modern narrow sense, is how you demarcate men and women. It's only if you adopt that modernist view would it make sense to you to adopt the claim that women on the factory floor confuses the genders. I hope that I've demonstrated to you that there was emphatically not a confusion of the genders in World War II, but there was a change or shift in role. Okay. So Jed asks a question here. Could you say that the women made extra effort to distinguish themselves at the time, but that dropped off after a while? Jed, that is quite accurate. And in fact, I am going to propose to you next time when we regroup here, Dr. Schlecht's answer to what actually went wrong with the modern family, but it was not women on the factory floor, okay? It was not unemployment, it was not women on the factory floor. And again, if we run the modern family with its specialized roles through a Great Depression, we'll say that the modern family actually isn't surviving the Great Depression very well. I am going to propose to you for other reasons why World War II was pretty much trash on the American family. But the reason why it trashed the American family, I'll tip off what my answer is going to be to you, was basically widespread adultery and infidelity during the time. It's much more mundane and it's not so hard. I will talk about that next time. I'll leave that for next time. But I hope it's very clear to you now here. This is what I've offered you is actually what the right answer is not. What the right answer is not, in order that we don't go galloping off to modern industrialized notions of, visions of the suburban housewife as the traditional household as an answer to these kinds of issues. Moreover, I would say that the stakes are very high. I think you would agree that we do today live in an age where there's serious confusions among the genders. And today, of all eras, we need to actually think very clearly and sharply and accurately about this rather than perpetuating the kind of thinking that actually leads into the confusion. All right, very good. Erica asked, my grandma worked in a factory at a bomb site. She helped build weapons for World War II. Didn't realize that that was part of a broader trend in this period. Yes, because men were off fighting, women were occupying all of these roles, just like the cheerleader. My mother also, she worked in fruit, but she went into a fruit packing warehouse and she actually manufactured the crates that the fruit were packed in. So that was a pretty common thing. All right, with that, our time is up. I need to let you all go. So we're going to do it for class, and I look forward to seeing you with recitation. If you've got some interactions that you want to address and consider with recitation, questions about this, then we'll take those up on Thursday. And then we also have an important reading to discuss on Thursday. Blessings to you all. In class, I'm going to let you go.